it feels like, just reading the tea leaves, it feels like now this is going to happen based on all the news that we've gotten that's come out yesterday and today. And the news that I'm referencing is a potential trade out of San Francisco of Niners star wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk, where Aiyuk wants a new contract. Obviously, like Justin Jefferson got that huge deal. Now we're like CeeDee Lamb's waiting for his contract. Jamar Chase is waiting for a contract. Tyreek Hill just got all that guaranteed money this weekend. And Aiyuk wants to get paid. And the Niners don't want to pay him that much money. He's under contract for this year. So the thought was San Francisco, with the Super Bowl window still being open, losing in the Super Bowl last year, will basically just try and make this work with Aiyuk, and maybe he plays elsewhere next year, but want to keep Brandon Aiyuk on the roster this year. Worth noting, they did draft Ricky Pearsall at the end of the first round, maybe as a contingency for this year, but just with the expectation that Aiyuk, Debo, or both would not be on the team coming up next year. So they do have a plan in place, and it would be Pearsall stepping in for Aiyuk if indeed Aiyuk is dealt. But I think a lot of people, myself included, Ken, felt no way Brandon Aiyuk is actually getting traded. The Niners are trying to win. But then we get a report from Matt Mayoko, who's been covering the Niners for as long as I've been doing in this game, which is a long time. He's been doing this for 30 plus years, covers the Niners now for NBC Sports Bay Area. So when Mayoko tweets stuff like this, it's not that he has to be right. It's that it shouldn't be taken lightly, what he says, because he's been doing this for a long time and he's really, really well respected. He tweeted that he thinks it is now legitimate that the Niners are going to trade Brandon Aiyuk because they're really far apart on a deal, and Aiyuk is really making a huge stink. He's holding in right now at training camp, and it doesn't look like a deal is going to get worked out because Aiyuk will not lower his asking price. The Niners are trying to pay him X. He wants Y. He's not willing to budge, and maybe the Niners look to move on here from Brandon Aiyuk. Now, we couple that with a tweet from Andrew Filipponi at the Pony Express on Twitter, who is the afternoon drive host of the Odyssey Sports radio station in Pittsburgh. I've been on a show, a great dude, like really talented host and very plugged in Pittsburgh. And he tweeted that the Steelers are working hard to consummate a trade to bring Brandon Aiyuk to the Steelers, to have him be, the top wide receiver opposite George Pickens, which would make that passing game really interesting. We have also seen the Browns, the Patriots, and the Commanders, among others, be linked to Brandon Aiyuk. Now we can get to the Pittsburgh part, the other teams in this equation, Ken. But just from the San Francisco perspective, like maybe they end up trading. We'll see what they would get back. Probably some like draft picks, like future assets. But maybe trading like a top 10 wide receiver in the league the year after they lost the Super Bowl to the Kansas City Chiefs. I think you and I might be sharing an opinion here on San Francisco if this trade happens, and maybe if it doesn't as well. Your thoughts here on the Niners and this Brandon Aiyuk stuff?
Yeah, I think with the we talked about the Ravens in the last segment. I pretty keen on betting they're under, or just thinking that they're going to be a pretty good, not great team this year. Played a possible division. Team almost certainly got worse in a couple areas that are really significant. Defensive coordinator gone. That's an easier case to make than this one. This one's got a little more hocus pocus attached to it right now. If you want to bet the Niners to go under, it's a lot of the same players, and they're all awesome. And you could argue maybe even the quarterback has another step to take forward by just continuing to play well and kind of progressing in his career arc. So it's a tougher case to make, no question. But I think the way I said it to you earlier is, man, like if the Niners did succumb to the Super Bowl loser curse of typically playing worse, than they did the year before, the Super Bowl loser tends to have a rough go of it a lot of the time, doesn't make it back to the game, sometimes doesn't make the playoffs, almost certainly plays worse in some way. You think about the Eagles last year, got off to a great start, but then really plummeted down the stretch, lose to Tampa in a playoff game. So it doesn't have to be terrible, but I think what I told you is, I don't know if they're going to succumb to the same, curse, quote unquote curse. But if they did, why wouldn't this be like the first domino in that happening? And then it just we see what happens from there, right? Where look what we just did like an hour on, like one of the three criteria that most strongly predicts success, quality of your passing offense. Yeah, it's Kyle Shanahan and it's his guy at quarterback to a certain extent. And Purdy was great in a bunch of ways last year. This doesn't have to go poorly, but they're going to be worse. Like just look at that criteria, pass offense. They're going to be worse. Now, maybe they go from really good to pretty good. And then they still make the playoffs. They still win a bunch of games. What is the argument that they will be better? by doing this in like the most important thing that predicts just actual wins, not expected wins, not how good we think you are, not some kind of PFF grade, like the actual number of regular season wins you have. The number one predictor among all areas of anything is pass offense. Theirs gets worse. So what am I supposed to think is going to happen with them over the balance of a season? I think they'll win fewer games if they trade him, and then obviously they would get nothing in return that would help them this year. So you'd be plugging in Pearsall into that spot. Even if the difference is small, they on average they will win fewer games by making this trade. There's no question. I think there's a lot of other interesting wrinkles here too with other teams and where he goes and this stuff. But you just start there. Hey, you know what the most important predictor is? They're going to be worse at that thing. So that's the first immediate takeaway from any projected Brandon Aiyuk trade.
What is your sense, Pete, as to what's going to happen with Niners star receiver Brandon Aiyuk? Do you think they're going to keep him? Do you think they're going to trade him? If they trade him, where do you think he goes? And what do you think happens if and when Aiyuk does get dealt?
I thought all along they would keep him in large part because, they are such a good team and you don't want to be given that way an opportunity to go to the Super Bowl, and you might lose that if you get rid of him. He's such a valuable part of what they do. But the more and more you start hearing stuff leaking out of there, it sounds like they're ready to move him. And if that's the case, and he wants to be moved because he wants a new contract, where does he go? And it's always a risky proposition for the team making the deal. And the reason I say that is because it's not just giving up draft picks. You're going to have to pay them. And so it's a twofold process. You have to give up the picks, agree to a contract with them, and then keep them around because you're not going to get a rental on them. You're not going to do that. Nobody's that dumb. So I think compensation is key, and then what is the contract going to look like, and who's willing to do that? We've seen a lot of these work out, and we've seen a lot of them not work out. So I always think it's risky because you're giving up picks and paying. Cheap labor that you would get with those picks is not cheap labor when you trade for them. So the Steelers make some sense. I think, I think Washington, because he wants to be reunited with his good buddy from ASU, Jaden Daniels, that would make some sense. They could use another big play wide receiver. So I think those are teams to keep an eye on. I also still think the 49ers, when they sit down, if nothing comes their way that's really that appealing, just play and keep them. I mean, you got a chance to go to the Super Bowl again. You're loaded. Why not keep them?
Is there one that you're kind of hoping he goes to? Is there any bet that you're looking to place as a result? Your betting thoughts, please, of a potential Brandon Aiyuk deal. Obviously has not happened yet, but again, seems like it could happen now sooner rather than later.
Okay. Of those four, where do I feel like he makes the pass offense like for sure better? More like where I'd be the most confident? Is Cleveland the answer to that question? Is that the right answer?
No.
Only because
No.
On one of them you have Arthur Smith's offense. We can make jokes about like is Brandon Aiyuk about to become like the wide receivers of the 2023 Atlanta Falcons? And on the other hand, and the other two, rather, Patriots and Commanders, have rookie quarterbacks. We don't even know if they can get the ball to Brandon Aiyuk. It's not even possible. So at least with Cleveland, like I think, Watson benefits a ton. He and Cooper together, like they would win more games if Brandon Aiyuk was on the team. My concern is almost that he would be wasted on at least two of the other teams, and then Pittsburgh kind of the wild card.
The gap between Brandon Aiyuk. So let's say that you think George Pickens is as good as Aiyuk, close to being as good, whatever. Like Pickens is really good. The gap between Aiyuk and the next best receiver on the Steelers after Pickens, Grand Canyon. Like the chasm, could not be Van Jefferson. But I agree with your assessment that it's almost not even worth talking because that's team building wise, it makes no sense for the Patriots to do that. Like they're not far enough along yet. It just doesn't make
We're going
sense.
All in.
It's crazy.
Let's go get it.
Why would you do that? Also for whatever it's worth, and like a delicious bit of potential irony, everyone seems to think, and I'm not there in Foxborough to know this, just like what smart people are saying, that both Jalen Polk and Javon Baker are both going to be good. So the Patriots have finally apparently found some good rookie wide receivers, and all it took was dismissing the greatest head coach of all time, potentially, for that to happen. So maybe. But Cleveland, I think, is fascinating, right? So I think he helps Pittsburgh maybe a little more for that reason. But we have to remember something about Cleveland now. Ken Dorsey's going to be the offensive coordinator and call the plays this year for the Browns. Dorsey, think about what Buffalo was prior to Dorsey getting fired after the Monday night game against Denver, what Buffalo became when Joe Brady took over as the offensive coordinator, more of a run-first team, kind of limit the turnovers of Josh Allen. Dorsey runs a spread offense. Like, the Browns are going to throw the ball a lot this year. So let's just say, like, Jerry Jeudy hasn't been cleared yet, but Judy's going to be, we think is going to be good to go for week 1. Let's say the Browns trade for him. And it's Amari Cooper, it's Jerry Jeudy, it's Brandon Aiyuk. Elijah Moore just suffered a concussion, which is bad because it's never good. He had a concussion last year and had like a hospital stay. But let's say that Elijah Moore is like the 4th receiver on this team. They have a couple intriguing young guys. Jamari Thrash, rookie this year. Cedric Tillman, rookie last year. And David Njoku. If Watson's good, they're going to score a lot of points. And I think people believe that the identity of the Browns is going to be what it was like the last couple years with the offensive line and like Nick Chubb. Like, Chubb might not be back until midseason, and now Dorsey's like calling the shots here. I think that offense would be really interesting if they traded for Brandon Aiyuk. But I would say Cleveland and Pittsburgh I think would both be great landing spots for him.
I can kind of pull this back to the 3 criteria too, and this is because of the 4 quarterbacks, obviously, with DTR and PJ Walker and Flacco and Deshaun. I know Flacco threw for a bunch of yards. Like, Cleveland pass offense rating per PFF last year, 29th in the NFL. Best edge in the league, led by the highest rated defensive player in the league last year at any position, which was Garrett. And the funny thing is the offensive line had a billion injuries. They still rated out 11th in top tier talent that played like a ton of snaps. So again, if you 3 criteria this, and we'll do the pass offense last because it's like the kind of tie a bow on it with Aiyuk or what the pass offense is going to be. Okay, they don't have to be first in pass rush. Like, they could be 3rd or 6th or whatever. They're probably going to be really good. They're unlikely to be really bad at that all of a sudden, just kind of like based on personnel and the fact that they probably have the best defensive player in the league by basically all measurement, as long as he stays healthy. Offensive line is going to be better. So it's like put them at, so let's say edge, they're in the top 3 to 5 teams in the league. Let's say an offensive line, they're in the top 5 to 7 teams in the league. They were 11th last year, and I'm going to be generous with that. They could be number 1. 5 to 7 teams. Okay. As you move the dial on pass offense up to even average, they were like basic, all close to dead last year. It was like Atlanta, a couple teams then. As you turn the dial on pass offense, even a little with those other 2 things locked in, you start to get crazy good records if you start to dial that up. Like, to even, like, God forbid you ever get to 10th, you're the Ravens last year, if you do that, basically. If you're a little, as you start to go higher than 10th, I mean. And that's why they're interesting. That's why we've talked about them a lot in the earlier part of the year. They do a lot of stuff. They have a lot of pieces that tends to fit with winning regular season games. That they do have some things that tend to fit with winning Super Bowls. They have a quarterback whose upside is that, even if he's never going to achieve it again, his upside is that. We have already seen it. He has had a season that fits previous Super Bowl winning quarterbacks. They were amazing at one side of the ball. Did they do stuff to get better at the other side? Maybe you think the answer to that's no. Health would be the argument there. This trade would be the argument for that if they end up doing that. Oh, here's a team that was top 4 DVOA in defense. Well, what do they do on offense? Well, Watson hypothetically will play more games. And they got one of the best 5 wide receivers in football. Does that fix that side enough for you to believe that they can be really good? So, yeah, I mean, Pittsburgh's like fun, and I think we're going to talk about the Steelers a lot more. But maybe it's like if you're talking deep playoff run, like the Browns need him more for that, because I don't know if the Steelers are going to make a deep playoff run. Like, I just don't know if that's going to happen. The Browns could do it. The Browns could be in the game against Mahomes at the end. I'm going to pencil him into that game already. Who's the opponent? Like, the Browns could be it. They make this trade, they could really be it.